Hi, everyone. It's Thursday afternoon, and we just finished our legal research class a little while ago. So I was ready to make you a preview video for week 5 of the semester. I cannot believe that after next week, we will already be a third of the way through the semester. But think back to everything we've accomplished over the last couple of weeks to really understand how cases are written and the structure of how a court case is written and how judges apply legal reasoning to make their decision. By now, you've already read, let me think, 3 complete cases. And by the time you finish your case brief homework, you will have read 4 cases. And I hope you start to notice the pattern of how these cases are written with the factual background and the procedural history, the identification of the legal issue on review, and then, of course, the holding, the answer to that issue, and then the bulk of the decision being devoted to legal analysis, where we start to see time and again that the court begins its legal analysis by first referring to existing precedent. We saw that in Red Sox, we saw that in Benucci versus Dorfman, and then we saw how the court took that existing precedent and then applied it to the current case before it to decide the outcome for that case. So time and again, we will continue to see that pattern, and you will start to see the structure of how legal writing is organized. But we're going to take a little bit of a break this week from actually reading lengthy case decisions or any case decisions. And we're going to jump back into that part called research. And we're going to really jump into learning how to find these court cases. And believe it or not, you're already well on the way to doing that because you already understand how a case citation works. So during week 5, we're going to go back to the beginning of what we talked about with how cases are published. So for this week, I definitely want you to review your notes on the reporter system, because we're going to talk about what happens to that court decision when a judge or the panel of judges is done with its writing and it's now sitting on the computer at their courthouse, or in the olden days when we would print it out. Where does it go from there? So we're going to go back to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago with the reporter system. So we'll talk about both federal and state cases. So remember what I told you, I'm not going to ask you to memorize the name of every single reporter where every single court decision all around the country is published. That would be way too much. But what I will want you to know is the organization for how cases are published in the West reporter system. Because as we mentioned with the Northeastern reporter, that is the reporter system that attorneys use to practice law. It does not mean that you cannot find these cases elsewhere. Certainly with the internet, you can find court cases published in many sources, but it's really important that we understand how West Publishing organizes the publishing of cases in the book system. And then, of course, now we find them online. And that's also something that I'll mention in class. Something we need to keep in mind when we begin learning how to locate court cases is to keep in mind that the system for finding court cases was developed long before the internet, like decades before the internet. And attorneys and paralegals and practitioners and judges relied upon an organizational system in the law library. Some of you probably remember something called the Dewey Decimal System, which is how libraries organize books by topic. So the law library developed something similar. We don't call it the Dewey Decimal System, but there was a way that law librarians had to organize law libraries to find the material. And because all of that was developed decades before the internet, when the internet came to be, it wasn't like everybody just said, well, now forget the book system, let's develop this whole new way of searching online. In fact, it really was an evolution of a process of taking what existed in books and then transferring it to being able to find it on a computer. So the hard part for us as researchers is that our method of finding cases using a company called Westlaw or using LexisNexis, which is the other highly reputable search engine for finding cases and other legal resources, is that it's kind of a mix of the old and the new. So you had to take an existing system of publishing cases and transfer it to an online method of finding. Ideally, what could have happened and what we are seeing an evolution of happening is that we scrap that system entirely and build a new one. But the law, like many other industries, is slow to develop. So it's really important that we know how cases were published under the book system, because that is still relevant today. And it is how attorneys and judges refer to court cases, by still using the West Reporter system. So again, that's a very long way for me to remind you that I would actually think reread parts of chapter 3 and do read chapter 4, although I think it's going to make more sense after we talk about it in class, and we'll get a memory of what those different reporters are called. So back to what I started to say a couple of minutes ago, when we learn how to find court cases, we are going to learn how to find both the federal cases. So we will find cases at all levels of that hierarchy of court triangle. We will find U.S. district court cases. We will find U.S. circuit court cases like the First Circuit, Second Circuit, and so on. We will even find U.S. Supreme Court cases, all those federal cases. We are going to name the reporters where those cases could be found. We are also going to learn how to find state court cases. I will not ask you to research cases from all 50 states, but what I will like you to know is the name of the reporters where the Massachusetts state court cases are published. And spoiler alert, you actually already know that. You know the Massachusetts Appeals Court Reporter, and you know the Massachusetts Reports, and you know the Northeastern Reporter. So we are going to add to our list of reporters by adding the federal reporters as well. And then we will tie it all together because they are all part of one big publishing system. Your book refers to, and this is back in chapter 3, there's actually a picture chart and there is a printed out chart on page 61 and 62. But here is a colored version of what it looks like. This is an organization of the West State Reporter System. There are thousands of courts all over the country, and that means tens of thousands of court cases. And the West Publishing got really smart and said, we need a way to organize cases. And so I'll just leave this picture up here while I talk for a minute. If you remember, we talked about reporters being books that publish cases, just like dictionaries are books that publish words. But there's not just one reporter where cases are published. We already know that. We know that there's multiple reporters. And so what West did was get into the business of publishing cases. And the way cases come out by reporters is that reporters are published in chronological order. So let that sink in for a second. What that means is as a case comes out, it goes into a book. And when the book gets too thick, we go into the next book and we keep just publishing cases in chronological order. Could you imagine, though, if there was one book for the entire country that published every single case from every single court? It would be massive. It would probably take up all of Middlesex. Maybe not that much, but it would take up a lot of space. And so West said, let's group some states together. And that's what they did here. This is loosely geographical. You can see it's not exact, but West developed these 7 reporters, and these are their names: the Pacific Reporter, Northwestern Reporter, Southwestern, Northeastern, I'm sure that one sounds familiar to you, Southern, Southeastern, and Atlantic, and grouped together different states and said, okay, states that are in the Pacific Reporter, those are the states that you can see in the maroon color here. All of those state cases are published in the Pacific Reporter. And guess what order? Chronological. How about the Northeastern Reporter? Because it's not exactly, the color is a little off on this, but the Northeastern Reporter are these purple states. You can see that only a couple of them are in the Northeast, like Massachusetts and New York, but the Northeastern Reporter also includes Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Do not ask me why that is. It just is. Just accept it. But that means that the Northeastern Reporter that you are already familiar with has cases in it that are not just Massachusetts cases. It also has in it New York, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois cases. And guess what order? Bingo, chronological. And the same thing is true for all of these reporters. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, how is that helpful? And I'll get to more about that in a minute. But I just want you to see that the breakdown is already that around the country, all state cases are grouped together by these different reporters, and they all follow the same system. Now, federal cases are published in different reporters, but they are all linked together in the reporter system. I'll get to those also. So this is just the preview. Clearly, I'm not going to give you the whole class over this video, but I just want to say a little bit more to get our feet wet for next week. So we now know that these cases are published in these reporters in chronological order. So how does that sound to you as a researcher? Let's say you have a client being charged with assault and battery with a deadly weapon in Massachusetts. And your attorney says to you, please go find me cases in Massachusetts involving assault and battery with a deadly weapon. I hope your eyes would bug out like this. Like, what would you do? What would you do to find those cases? Yes, you could go to the wall with the Northeastern Reporter, and you could pull the Northeastern Reporter off the shelf, and you could start reading Massachusetts court cases in addition to the other states. Or you could even pull the Massachusetts reports off the bookshelf and start reading cases, because that's also in chronological order. How long do you think it would take you to find cases just about assault and battery? A year? 2 years? That's an impossible task. And one of the challenges facing attorneys decades ago was that publishing cases in chronological order, as every reporter does, even the officials, is a really terrible way to do research. Because unless you know the exact citation of the exact case you're looking for, you cannot do research. Another way of saying that is without the citation, you can't do subject matter research. Find me all the cases dealing with child custody. Find me all the cases dealing with estate planning. Find me all the cases dealing with statutory interpretation, to give us an example. That would be impossible. And here is where the brilliance of West came in. West said, fine, we're going to go ahead and publish all of these cases in these reporters in chronological order. So you can find them all by citation, right? Reporter volume, name of the reporter, and first page. But we are going to link them together by subject matter. And this is where the research gets more complicated. And West developed a system of finding cases by subject matter, by taking every potential subject matter that there is in the law, and there's a lot, and making categories. So here's a page from Westlaw. We're going to have a chance to look at this together during the week, but this is a list in the West key number system of all of the big legal topics that are covered in every single court case. It's a really, really huge list. Please do not try to memorize this list. Just be familiar that this list exists and that every single legal topic is here. You can actually see that some of it's not even numerical because they've added numbers, like here, 314, 315, 315H, 315P. Do not memorize these numbers. The numbers are not important. What I want you to look at is the list. I think there's well over 450 different topics here, and you can see that it includes a number of legal topics. Now, what's brilliant about this system, and what I will describe in more detail in class, is that by using the headnotes in every single case, remember what headnotes do? They describe the point of law in a case. And do you remember that the headnotes have particular topics with their names there, like negligence and statutory interpretation? In fact, I even opened up a couple of our cases just to look at them. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that. I'm hitting the wrong button. Now I'm in the wrong place. This is what happens when I try to do this. I wanted to show you one of the cases. Here's Costa. Negligence, theater and shows. See those numbers there? That's what we're going to look at. These headnote numbers in cases correspond to the West key numbers. So Westlaw took every single case literally around the country and organized them by subject matter. And that is what makes the West publishing system so brilliant, is that it organizes every case by subject matter. Okay, more about that later. I look forward to getting started next week. Have a good weekend, everyone.